Among the latest White House executive orders, one is holding up payments to contractors. EO 14222 tells agencies to build tracking systems. It requires written justifications for each payout and a 30-day review of all contracts and grants. For the implications, we turn to the Executive Vice President for Policy at the Professional Services Council, Stephanie Castro. And have you seen payments held up? Is that what members are saying? What's going on here?
That's exactly right, Tom, and thanks for raising this issue. This executive order came out in late February, and we noted it with some concern because the first part of it does talk about creating in each agency a centralized technology system to record every payment to every contract grant with an official's name assigned to every payment, meaning taking responsibility for making that payment. What we have seen across the government is a delay on all contract-based payments. And in fact, the Department of Homeland Security, and this is a good thing, has created an auto response to let folks know when they are asking about the status of their invoices and the payments. That auto response comes back and cites this executive order and says this is a mandated pause. It is temporary, but they have no set date for when they're going to turn those payments back on. And this is creating a host of issues for contractors.
Yeah, and the idea of building a technology system to track as if they can do that in 30 days or something. I mean, some agencies have been trying to update their financial systems for 20 years and can't get it right.
It is very, very complicated. And the idea that we're going to pause all payments is really an issue in that, you know, as we are dealing as a community of contractors with stop work orders, with terminations, etc., we understand that the president wants to align programs with and projects with his priorities, and we completely understand that's the prerogative of every executive. However, it used to be that having a government contract was as good as cash when in the eyes of the financial system, those who are lending companies money. And right now, those companies are seeing some of their lines of credit not get extended. They're applying for new lines of credit so they can make payroll, etc. So this freeze on payments really has serious implications for not just individual companies, but for the industry as a whole.
And just as a detail, agencies have tracking systems for payments and who's responsible. Isn't that kind of basic accounting?
It is, although, you know, I think the key word from the executive order is a centralized technology system so that anyone can access it, maybe a dashboard, etc., to see whose name is against each payment. And so I would note, you know, there are some court cases wending their way through our judicial system where judges have ordered agencies to make payments on invoices. And in particular, I'm citing some of the court cases involving the U.S. Agency for International Development. And those payments are flowing, although slowly. They are rebuilding systems that they put into dormancy, et cetera. And so this really is an issue across the industry. I would also add the government is subject to something called the Prompt Payment Act, which is found in U.S. Code. And that is to say, if they don't pay their invoices within the set amount of time, they do start incurring interest. The fact that there is an executive order out there that some are interpreting to pause all payments, you get past that payment window, you are going to start incurring interest, and that's more than 4% on each contract. And so we are looking at an interesting situation where the government has paused payments, but they're actually going to have to pay a penalty for doing that.
And has anyone raised this issue to the administration directly?
There are folks who have raised them. We have raised it with members of the executive branch, but they are saying, you know, it's an executive order. They're interpreting it to say stop all payments. So that's what they're doing. I will say again, some payments are flowing because there are court cases out there that are mandating payments, but also dealing with financial institutions where, you know, they used to, again, as I say, it used to be treated as though a government contract was as good as cash. So you had lower margins for lower risk. Now they're going to be charging higher margins for higher risk because the government contracts are no longer considered to be as flexible as the financial institutions want them to be.
We are speaking with Stephanie Castro, Vice President for Policy at the Professional Services Council. And the other issue going on, the seeming return to the Brooks era of General Services Administration being in charge of all procurement. It hasn't been 100% one way or the other ever. And what is industry making of that one?
So you're referencing another executive order, Tom, that just came out last week. It came out on the 20th. And this is to consolidate certain procurements at the General Services Administration. Now, when GSA was created back in the 40s, it was to streamline common procurements. And this executive order does assign that role again to GSA. There's a whole bunch of directives in that order that, agencies have to submit plans and OMB has to make certain designations. But the long and the short of it is two key pieces, Tom. One is they're talking about common goods and services, and they're defining that as category management. So you go back to category management, you look at the 10 categories. Professional services in our name is one of them. And so they're really going to
there's not much left out of those 10 categories.
Right, exactly. I mean, it really is a large universe. What's interesting, though, is in that executive order, they talk about domestic procurement. So I'm going to parse that out a little bit when talking with executive branch officials about what that means for Department of Defense, for example, or for State Department. The other key element, I said there were two, is that it does take all government-wide acquisition contract vehicles for information technology, for IT, and centrally locate them at GSA. That's the other big piece here. So looking at GWACs, as we call them, and for IT and centralizing them at GSA, that is also not going to be a very easy thing to do. And so we are watching very, very closely to see what is captured within this executive order. There are various deadlines, as I mentioned, a whole bunch of tasks in this EO. Some of them have to be completed by April 3rd. OMB has to issue a memo to say how we're going to do this or how the executive branch is going to do this. So we should be getting more information shortly.
Yeah, but it does seem to be retro in its feeling, doesn't it?
It does seem to be a little bit like the pendulum is swinging back to an earlier era. That's true.
Stephanie Castro is Executive Vice President for Policy at the Professional Services Council. Thanks so much for that update.
Thanks, Tom.
And we'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.